Jacinda Ardern, Edmund Hillary, Peter Jackson, I don't know, Lordy. Your boys took one hell of a beating. You're very welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly. And joining us to look back on Ireland's third ever Test victory over the All Blacks are, as usual, Bernard Jackman. Birch, how are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome back.
And Murray Kinsella. Murray, how are you?
Good, you're back with a bang, Gav. How was your holiday?
Really, really special, yeah. I enjoyed it. I need another holiday afterwards, I think. But I did miss the game. I managed to conspire to miss the game. We were flying home literally for the sort of 80 minutes, 2 hours while the game was on. So that was disastrous. As soon as I had a bar of 3G on my phone, like entering like Irish airspace, I was straight on to the 42's live blog, actually. I was like, where can I be sure to find the immediate score of the game? And I know people at home would be like, how can you host a rugby podcast and not schedule your flights around a game? Like, I should point out, I was with one of the players' brothers, like, so he was in a far worse predicament than I was. I think he was a lot more nervy than me as well. I wanted to ask you, I haven't asked you this in a while, Murray, but like, we know that when you're covering a game live at a stadium, you like to do so in a cold, emotionless state, almost drone-like. Do you have to park your kind of national allegiances in that type of a situation, or can you allow yourself to get carried away a little bit by the occasion and the Irish victory?
It's funny you asked that, because I was walking the dog this morning. I was thinking about that, how last weekend was very different to usual. And that is one of the things, like, I'm not looking for sympathy here, but I have become kind of cold and detached, as you say, and impartial almost. And you just get on with the job of reporting on Ireland's games. But it definitely did feel different. Like, you had to look up so many more times. Normally your head's buried for the last half an hour, blasting out a match report, trying to get it ready for full time. But you just had to soak this in because it was such a special occasion. And as myself and Gary Doyle mentioned afterwards in our members pod, like, it was incredible because we'd been away from it for so long. I'd forgotten what it was like being in a stadium with that much atmosphere and emotion. It's not always like that, obviously, but it was really special and really an amazing experience. I feel so privileged to have been there, and that my job gives me that opportunity to do it. So yeah, it was very different, Gav. And coming away from it, the buzz, going for a pint afterwards, and everyone just wanted to talk about every moment. There were so many of them, and yeah, it was a wonderful, wonderful evening.
First two Ireland victories over the All Blacks, Brett, were special in their own right, but there did seem to be an especially special quality about this one. You were there as well, I know. I don't know what it was. Maybe, as Murray says, the fact that we hadn't experienced it nationally, collectively, or in a group of thousands of people to that extent in so long. Or maybe the fact that beating the All Blacks, not that it's routine, but maybe isn't a complete Hail Mary job anymore, and you can actually appreciate the performance for what it was. I don't know. What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, look at that. Yeah, I think we didn't drag them down to our level and frustrate them and just kind of hang on for a win, even though it was obviously very tight at the end. But we actually played. We went after them from the first couple of minutes, and we imposed our game on them, which is, in fact, let's be honest, like it's probably mirrors some of what the All Blacks have been doing for the last while. So it's a new style of rugby for Ireland. And that's probably why it was more enjoyable, because we weren't just clinging on and, as I said, trying to disrupt them and being messy and playing a safe type game. We played and we were positive, and we lost opportunities because we were so positive, but that seems to be the way the team now see the future. And if that's how they do continue to play, it's going to be a joy to watch. It won't be without errors, it won't be without frustrations, because when you play a higher risk, higher tempo game, there is going to be more errors. And, all the people who want offloads, how did you feel when, Jack Conan throws that pass to offload to Gibson Park 2 meters out, and it's a knock on and the All Blacks escape? But so there's just a little example of where it can go wrong and teams can get let off the hook. But when we get it right, it's going to be phenomenal. And it will mean that we'll score a lot easier and be able to score from deeper as well. And ironically, the area that Ireland, and particularly provincial teams are famous for, is that A-zone efficiency. That was incredibly poor at the weekend. Now, some of that's down to All Blacks. All Blacks obviously scramble defence, but I think that's an area that is definitely something that we will fix. And I don't think we'll ever be bored of us getting 5 yards out, maybe putting our foot on the ball and grinding out a try. We have the power athletes to do it now. So I'm incredibly positive about where it's going, and I do think I do think it's something that we can build on, and it's not a once-off, which is maybe I wasn't sure. Chicago obviously wasn't a once-off. We obviously had a game plan that was maybe ahead of the curve a little bit, but I think that I'd be shocked if World Rugby changed the laws where it becomes a disadvantage to play positively. So I do think we're maybe not ahead of the curve, but we're on the money in terms of where the game is going, and we should get better at it the more we do it. So it's positive.
We'll chat later on as well about the Ireland women's team and their upcoming test with Japan. Ciara Griffin's farewell. We've got to give a mention to Rassie at some point as well. He's just posted an image of himself hiding in shrubbery, barking instructions to players. We'll get into all of that later on. But to continue with this post-All Blacks debrief, Murray, when you did have time to reflect on the game, and I'm sure you've watched it a few times now, if I was to ask you for where to begin in terms of how Ireland won the game, what's the thing that stands out to you most? Is it what Bernard is saying there about actually Ireland focusing on themselves, playing their own game, and not necessarily trying to counteract what New Zealand are doing, but just trying to do what they do best? Or was there something else that jutted out to you as being the catalyst in this win?
It was the sheer relentlessness of the Irish performance. As Bernard said, right from the very first attacking opportunity, they skirt them up the right-hand side. Some of that fluid attacking shape we've seen. Conway goes to the 22. I know they get turned over. Was one of those entries where they didn't get any return, but it didn't stop from there. It was just a constant unsettling of the All Blacks and putting them in positions where they really struggled to make decisions defensively. Obviously the attack was really impressive again. There was only 2 offloads, I think, officially in the stats, but that's not to say it wasn't ambitious and varied and creative, because it was at all times. The funny thing is, after the Japan match, I wrote in one of our newsletters maybe that it was All Blacks-esque from Ireland, and I actually felt a bit there was a trepidation there in writing it, thinking that's a bit crazy to say, but it's really not. It was in terms of the skill level of the forwards, in terms of everyone being a decision maker, as well as a real physicality. And that's something that allows you to flourish in your attacking game as well. So that side of the game stood out to me totally, how they absolutely gassed the All Blacks, made them make 231 tackles, attempt 250 of them. And in fairness to the All Blacks, they did deliver some incredible try-line defence to keep Ireland out, but they cracked after half-time for those 2 tries, in particular the Caelan Doris one, which was, jarringly poor defence from them, but that's probably a product of all that attacking focus that you've brought, how you've stretched them across the pitch, how you've forced them to scramble and thrown different pictures at them that they weren't expecting coming. So, yeah, it was a relentless performance from the Irish attack, which we've obviously discussed relatively recently in a negative light and been critical of it. And I look back and I do think we were being fair, and that was, the attack was poor at that time. We couldn't see what they'd been talking about. We couldn't see the evidence of clearly what they'd been working on. Probably a lesson for me that things can take time, and sometimes it takes those mistakes on the pitch to iron that out. So credit to Farrell and Mike Catt. They stuck the course with that. Even I thought the line-out strikes, something that we, again, have criticised, with Catt's leading that area, but they showed creativity there. They showed real ability to kind of penetrate the All Blacks defence, win the gain line. And then when you've got this back, which, again, before the Japan game was the thing we were most excited about, wasn't it? That unit that they'd put together, the varied skill sets of them, as well as the dynamism and explosive power of them. And yeah, the proof has been absolutely in the pudding. They look like they can get better as well, which is the really exciting thing. Some of those guys are still young. The front row is a new front row. Porter's 25, Keller's 23, Darce is 23 I think, and some of the other guys there are young as well and have more ahead of them. So the relentlessness and that forward pack are the 2 big things probably that stuck out.
Birch, when you hear Johnny Sexton talking to Claire McNamara after the game, and she puts it to him that it's almost a new Ireland or a new style of play, and he does that kind of trademark Sexton grimace / smile and kind of corrects her or gives his counterpoint that actually we've been trying this for a while, it's just coming together now. Do you agree with that? Because it does look markedly different, even allowing for the fact that in the past you could say, okay, they were trying things and they were failing to execute them, or for whatever reason it wasn't coming off. It doesn't seem like Saturday's performance was just all of these things coming to fruition or bearing fruit. It feels more advanced than even what they were trying, if that makes sense.
Yeah, look, it's way more advanced than what they were trying, and that's the issue. So I think I've been critical of it, and I look back at some of the games that I was basing that criticism on, and it's chalk and cheese to what we saw against Japan and against New Zealand in terms of the accuracy of it, in terms of the speed to get back in the game, having a two-sided attack, having very tight connections out the back, having really good decoy lines. So like they definitely have been building it. But I mean, some of the decoy lines or some of the options from the forwards previously have been really poor. You know, there was no chance of a defender biting down. So it has all come together quickly. And I think time has been good. I look back and you know, I suppose the turning point was probably England. But there was no crowd there, you know, and I suppose it was hard to say that was the landmark win because England finished fifth in the Six Nations, right? So normally if you beat England, you think, right, that's the barometer of Northern Hemisphere. We're right there. But because England had a poor Six Nations and there seemed to be issues in terms of their squad, it was hard to give them massive credit for that, even though, you know, Johnny, I'm sure, and Farrell and them would say that you know, the building blocks were there, but they certainly were nowhere near as evident as they have been this November. And I include Japan in that because, in fairness, what we saw against Japan, we saw against New Zealand again. And that's what you want. You want to be able to see the same pictures over and over again. And it doesn't mean you have to pick the same options, but that's how players get better. And that's how you become unpredictable for defences. So what's changed? I think basing the team around Leinster has helped. You know, having 12 Leinster players in there who are used to playing together, who understand each other, that cohesion is there. Not having a game plan that's a million miles away from Leinster's helps. I'm not saying that Farrell and Cat don't deserve credit, but what they've done is smart. They've actually picked players who are suitable to the game plan that Mike Cat wants to play, and just coincidentally, that's very similar to how Leinster play. And then they also maybe a little bit lucky in terms of maybe CJ going home has opened up an opportunity to get, you know, Doris and Conan into the team, or certainly one of them. Porter moving across to Loosehead, which isn't luck because they were involved in that decision, has, you know, opened up. And Kelleher now is in his third season. He's a British and Irish line traveller. You know, he's ready now to take the place of Herring. So suddenly your whole athleticism and dynamism has improved. Plus, let's be honest, Gibson Park is more suited to Conor to playing that high tempo. And again, I'm not saying that's I have to give credit to Cat and Farrell for picking him. But so a lot of things have come together at once. And for sure, but I think, listen, to go back to the start, post-World Cup 2019, there was two big issues. One was our game plan wasn't as effective as it had been. Right, so you needed someone like Mike Cat to come in and have a vision. And in fairness to him, he came in and said, look, we're going to play an offloading, high-tempo game. Right, so that's the start of it. Farrell's vision was camp needed to be enjoyable, and we needed to create better leadership in terms of players. And they've worked over the last 2 years to implement that or get to the level we see now. But there's been other things that Farrell deserves credit for. It mustn't have been an easy decision to take the forwards off Simon Easterby. You know, he's been working with Simon Easterby for 4 or 5 years. You know, there'd be a good relationship there. He had the balls or the bravery or put the team first to bring Paul in. He also, you know, he gave Mike Cat responsibility for skills now as well. So Mike Cat's now not just the attack and backs coach, he's also doing the skills. Paul is doing the breakdown. He moved that, took it over from John Fogarty. So there's, you know, Gary Keegan. I mean, there's so many different things you can look at. But like, take James Lowe's interview after the game, you know, and where he said the media were bollocks, and it was quite funny, whatever, right? But if you dig a little bit deeper in that, like, James Lowe is framing his performance, and that's a psychological technique. I mean, realistically, James Lowe was at fault for the Will Jordan try. Okay, he made a really good read for the last tackle, and absolute credit to him. But he wasn't exposed because Ireland had so much possession, so much territory. He wasn't exposed as a traditional left or right winger would be against the All Blacks. So we still don't know. We still don't know. But that's irrelevant. What's really important is that James Lowe believes he has fixed that, right? So I'd flip that completely and think that's massive credit to whoever's been working with him to frame it that it's all our fault. but he's actually fixed it, because that's going to be important when he plays against Villiers or whoever he plays in the Six Nations, Lusri Samet or whatever, when they want to take him on the outside. So there's lots of little things that have happened, and it's all come together perfectly. And I do think Farrell and Kat, who've been criticised, and I've been questioning whether it was going to work. It has worked, and now we look to be in a really good place in terms of the international side.
There's a lot in that. I know Shane McCarthy in the members WhatsApp group, Murray, had a question about Paul O'Connell, who Bernard touched upon there. He was mentioning that Mike Catt's influence has been talked about a lot. It's less than a year since Paul O'Connell joined the coaching ticket as a forwards coach. And how does the pod rate his impact and the pack's performance before/after his arrival? Do you want to take that one?
That's actually something I really got out of the game on second, third watch, was the quality of the breakdown work in this performance. Like, the speed of ball over the last couple of weekends has been exceptional for Ireland. Like, some test leading breakdown speed. And even you think of Doris's try, that's a phenomenal clear out from James Ryan, so that Ardy Savea can't fold around the corner, and Taylor's left a little bit more isolated. Even the ruck before that, Andrew Conway gets nice and deep, and Whitelock is delayed on his fold, and then Keller can win the collision, and everything's easier. Across the board, like, there's so many clips, I clipped up loads of them, they're not great for sharing on Twitter, but of phenomenal clear outs by Furlong. Porter, he had 32, I think, in a massive shift, and there's a real accuracy and attitude around that side of the game. Joe Schmidt obviously had a big influence on Paul O'Connell in that area of the game, so that's been really apparent. I think line out defence is another obvious one in terms of what you're seeing on the pitch. Ireland have been, I think, over the last, since O'Connell's come in, really aggressive and really accurate again in that area. They're getting consistent steals and putting pressure on and forcing opposition to win ball where they don't exactly want to win it, and that's become a real strength and kind of superpower for this team. So the actual areas he's in charge of have been impressive. Obviously on their own ball, it hasn't been perfect all the time, and there's definite improvements there. Young hookers are always going to have that, and young line-out callers and people getting used to that pressure in Test rugby. That's part and parcel of it, and will make them better in the long run. But you can only speak very highly of the work and what we've seen in terms of on the pitch. Off the pitch as well, I'm guessing, and from what I hear, he's a really positive influence. Again, good habits, good mindset, good attitude towards things, really good communicator. And I was so impressed the last time he did media. He's always obviously been quite fluent a speaker and thoughtful, but it's even another level now where he's clearly got to be so concise with his players and so on point and not waste words and not overcomplicate messages. So I'm sure that side of it has been really impressive too. And it probably suits him to be in that assistant coach role where he can have that closer bond and relationship with players, and it's less removed, I suppose. So yeah, it was a stroke of genius, really, and credit to Farrell, as Bert says, and I suppose to David Nusafor for stumping up and getting it done as well. It's had a big impact, and all the areas he's working in are showing clear signs of growth, and again, there's potential there for more.
Sticking with yourself, Murray, for a moment, and we don't need to stay on this for particularly long, but I know you got a couple of emails from people who were pointing out, similarly to what Bernard mentioned there, about how this performance was Leinster dominated, or at least, the first hour or so was. Starting lineup was. I mean, it was quite conspicuous actually how it was Leinster oriented performance to begin with, and then Munster kind of finished it off in a strange way, and it was purely circumstantial. Just it happened to be the case that a couple of key players from each made big impact on both sides of the ball. Do you see that as in any way being an issue, or is it actually the opposite of an issue, in the sense that if you have most of your national team playing in one side week in, week out, that you have that consistency of performance and regularity and partnerships and so on that can actually breed success?
Yeah, it's funny what slant you take in this. Someone like Ben Darwin, who's massive into the cohesion in rugby with gainline analytics, he would say it makes complete sense to just pick from Leinster and Munster. That's what you want to do. You want to have the most cohesive team with the most proven combinations of players who really understand each other's game, and he can cite examples from all sorts of leagues in that. So in that pure performance sense, 100%, it does make total sense to predominantly base your side around it, especially a team as good as Leinster. And then Munster obviously have been consistently competitive as well. On the flip side, though, it doesn't speak volumes for the pipeline from elsewhere. Obviously, the population thing, which we've discussed around Leinster, means they're going to produce more players. The private schools as well, again, we've discussed it. And we've probably discussed our concerns, I think, and our hope that the work that the RFU are attempting to do can broaden that pathway and bring in more different players who've got different experiences and different skill sets, and add something different to the picture. Like Furlong is a great example of someone who came through the youths, and he's not exactly like every other player, is he? He's got a little bit more of a creative streak, and he's got a sense of doing things his own way and probably questioning things and figuring it out for himself. And that's really valuable in any side. That variety of personalities as well as skill sets is a crucial part of it. So absolutely, I think when you're looking at it from a broader structural and union point of view, there is probably a desire to improve that in the other provinces and have more representation. But right now, with the pure performance hat on, as Bert says, it has played a role in Ireland looking so cohesive and having really good understanding on the pitch.
Yeah, just on that Munster thing, it was funny. I wasn't up in the leather armchairs in the press box with like Murray. I was down at the grassroots with the public. But
slumming it.
If you might remember, Ireland. Ireland kind of came out a little bit late, so the All Blacks were actually lined up for the anthems, and there was just a little delay, a 30 or 45 second delay, and a Munster fan a couple of rows down from me shouted out, "It might be a Leinster team, but I fucking love the Munster tactics, lads. Make them wait like a Thomond Park." And I just thought it was brilliant. But no, seriously, in terms of the game and the team selection, what a ideal situation. You've got scoreboard lead. The All Blacks now have to play from deep, and you can bring on two poachers in Peter Manny and Ty Byrne. I mean, that's if you're dreaming about how the scenario should hold out. You don't want to be bringing Peter on to chase the game, but by God, if you've got a lead or it's tight, he's absolutely ideal, and likewise with Byrne. So it did work out well, and look, those lads have an influence, even if they're not starting. I mean, it's not just Leinster in terms of ideas. It's an Irish team, and Bundy and Jack Carty being in there this week, and Battlecloon, etc. They all have a role to play to make it a little bit different, a little bit special. So and the other thing I wanted to say was, the James Lowe comment I made about framing. I mean, that's just an example. But look at the resilience we showed during the game to have that many A-zone entries and not score, and to go in at halftime 10-5. Weaker teams mentally would be saying we blew our chance. But Ireland never panicked, and so there was lots of things. And look, that's not all down to Gary Keegan, but it's a shared credit to the management. To have them in such a good place, physically and mentally.
Just one last point, sorry, Gav, on the thing around where players are from. I'm never really struck by that because it's an Ireland team, and I think the coaches should pick who they see as the best team. I absolutely think that should be the case always. But I have been actually struck by the level of feedback, as you say, emails and messages and people saying it to me, and not just Twitter noise around team naming and people saying they're never going to go watch a match, probably someone who's never even gone to watch a match in the first place. So I think that's a really bad place to judge it. It's actually real life where people are saying it to me, and again, some of the really considered and thoughtful emails around concerns that this team maybe doesn't show that there's a pathway there for other players from different avenues and things like that. So there actually is a bit of concern around it over there, around the kind of country. And again, I think we have discussed a lot of these issues around growth of the game and make sure that it's a team that represents the whole country and different people from different pathways. So yeah, it's one to keep an eye on, definitely.
And I know, just to finish on this, Birch, I know you just mentioned there the likes of Aki obviously plays for Connacht and adds that sprinkling of magic, and you're always going to have a couple of those players, but you also don't want those players to become outliers, because if you're a fan of Ulster or Connacht now listening to this conversation, and while we're not selecting the team, I mean, we're all pretty much saying that, if you're looking for consistency of performance and partnerships and cohesion and whatever, then you pretty much select from mainly Leinster, probably second most from Munster, and then a couple from the others. Like, that doesn't make for good listening either for people from Ulster or Connacht, or even Munster, really, if you were looking at the game of the weekend, right?
I don't want any negativity today, Gav. I'm not going to go down that route. I'm just on the bandwagon. Don't get me going. No rants. All positive.
Perfect. They'll be delighted to hear that. Well,
that's
to
one
pick
for
you
January.
up.
That's one for a cold, wet January. Yeah.
Dry January, yeah, we'll all be. Here's one from Gordo then, and I know, Bernard, you mentioned a moment ago that our resilience wasn't all down to Gary Keegan at the weekend, and obviously not, but he was asking about Keegan, and I think sports psychologists, generally speaking, so Gordo in the members WhatsApp group was saying he's interested to hear our thoughts on the impact Gary Keegan has made behind the scenes since joining, even if it is in a part-time capacity. And he adds, I know psychological shortcomings, quote unquote, was one of the review findings from the 2019 Rugby World Cup, and Enda McNulty was moved on pretty swiftly after that. But what has Keegan brought to the table? What is a sports psychologist's importance to a professional setup like this? And in what way do you think this can help us finally bridge that Rugby World Cup quarter-final hurdle? He mentions as well he doesn't follow boxing, so he doesn't know much of Keegan's background. Maybe I can come in on that, but I'll leave it to yourselves firstly to speak about the importance of a sports psychologist, lads, in that type of a setup. And maybe, Bernard, you've heard of Keegan's impact in the background? Sorry.
Yeah, I think so. I think he doesn't just work with players or doesn't get up in front of the room and give a lecture and explain the key bullet points to performance. I think it's subtly drip fed, and sometimes it's drip fed through the coaches. Sometimes it's just working with the coaches in terms of their message for a week, and I think it's been a positive. So also, like, I think Sexton as a leader as well has found his authentic self, without using bullshit words, but like, he's so comfortable now being a leader, and it's all about we, not me. Even his 100 cap, straight away talking about players who've retired that didn't, Rob Kearney and Fergus McFadden who retired didn't get a send off. Keane Healy is still there. So, and even after the weekend, he wasn't afraid to say, "Look, this isn't the end for us. It's a start." So all those messages, that are being, I'm sure, spoken about in Abbottstown, are coming true. And then, as I said, I think the biggest focus was post 2019. Was creating this psychological safety. So basically, my opinion is valued. I can be myself in the squad, and that's massive. That's massive. That's the foundation stone now for high performance. And from that, it's easier to hold people to account. You get better buy-in, etc. So, as I said, people think sports psychology is you get like the amount of teams who I hear have a relegation playoff or a cup final in GA and soccer and rugby, and they want someone to come in and talk about sports psychology. That's not really how it works. You may get a short hit, but it's something that's just drip fed and has to be consistent, and that gets everybody understanding why they're there and feeling more part of it. And there's another guy, Owen Eastwood. He wrote a book called Belonging. He's worked with the All Blacks before. He actually worked with Harlequins at the tail end of last season. He's somebody else. I'm not even sure if he's a total sports psychologist, but if that's his background, but he works in that space in terms of bringing a group together and making sure the mindset, the identity, the attachment, the culture is very strong. So there's some brilliant people out there, and I think Gary Keegan, if he was Irish, if he wasn't Irish, he'd be working with some of the best teams in the world. That's how good I hear he is, but you might know more than me, Gav.
Yeah, Gav, I'd love to hear a bit about his background, boxing, how he did it, what he did.
Yeah, like I suppose I don't know if you'd even describe him as a sports psychologist. Strictly speaking, he's probably more of a performance coach, and I know there are elements of both jobs that overlap. The first thing I'd say about Keegan is that he's an absolute grafter. He's not just some kind of guru who sits in a leather chair and dishes out wisdom or sits guys down for a quiet chat. Like, he is an unbelievably hard worker and an unbelievably diligent fellow. I mean, he's successful in business outside of sport anyway, but even when he transformed Irish boxing, like Irish boxing or the IABA didn't have a pot to piss in, he was tasked with hiring one head coach, and on the same day Billy Walsh and Zor Antia both interviewed for one role at the National Stadium out the back of it, and he could only hire one. He went with Billy. Billy is an Irish boxing legend, had been to the Olympics, and that's probably what edged him. Also, Zor couldn't speak English. He had a translator with him. But like Keegan went to Sport Ireland and basically pleaded with them or demanded extra funding so that he could create a new role, so that you could have Billy working in tandem with Zor, because he was so impressed by Zor. And you look at that partnership, the three of them, but particularly, I suppose, Billy and Zor on the ground, like it's yielded half of our boxing medals ever. I think 9 Olympic medals out of 18 in total in the space of less than 20 years. And we've been competing at the Olympics for over 100 years. So he, but then how did he actually go about that? Like, by the way, any members listening, he did a brilliant podcast with Shane Keegan, How to Win at Dominoes, which is one of our members' offerings, members.the42.e. If you're not a member and you want to sign up there, it's the very first episode of How to Win at Dominoes with Shane. But like, kind of similar to what Bernard says, it wasn't a case of just like sitting down and telling people, oh, we can be just as good as anybody else. Like, there would have been learnings from better setups around the world, and the way Ireland integrated themselves into kind of elite world-class competition was firstly changing their entire reputation, because they were known as kind of messers, and you wouldn't bring them over to a training camp on account of the fact that they weren't especially professional. So firstly, he sort of smoothed that over. They went to places like Germany to begin with in Europe and enhanced their reputation that way, and eventually that got them in the door, plus with Zor's connections in Eastern Europe to Russia and bigger nations. And like, it was a slow build, and it wasn't just a case of like sitting down and telling lads they can be as good as anybody else. Like, it was about actually putting the infrastructure in place in order to enhance that. And one last thing I'd say about it, which very much is pertinent, I think, to this rugby team and rugby generally speaking. Like, I was speaking with Billy Walsh recently for a piece on the 42, and he said the biggest challenge he found when he went over to America was instilling a sense of team in the American setup. The way American boxing worked and the way Irish boxing worked before Gary Keegan's input was that lads would just show up, and in fairness, there would have been a team ethic among the Irish guys, but they really, really drilled that home to the point that like one boxer's individual performance actually adds to a collective sense of achievement at tournaments and so on. And in America, it was purely individualistic, and Walsh, having learned from Keegan, had to impart that on this group of Americans. We've got to be a team. When you're weighing in the morning, that's for the team. When you're training on a Wednesday night or at 6 o'clock in the morning, that's for the team. And so yeah, that sense of collectivism and that sense of, I guess, camaraderie, which very much applies to rugby. Hopefully that's the longest I'll ever speak for uninterrupted on this podcast.
It's absolutely fascinating insight. And like, the togetherness of this group has never been in any doubt, and that's one thing I'd say. Like, Farrell, again, credit to him for getting someone like Gary Keegan's expertise involved, but he's obviously really good at uniting people and creating camaraderie as well. Like, the players throughout this have just loved him. Like, they love the guy, and even when they weren't playing well, there was no doubt, as far as I could tell, in anyone's mind that they wanted this to be a success, because they want Andy Farrell to do well, and he's reaping the rewards of that. And even from individual players, like Lowe is a really good example of what you're talking about, Gav. Like, he put his hand up and said, some of the way I was preparing probably wasn't of the sufficient standard. And that was his personality probably. And in the past, you know, you don't want to change someone, but he probably had to realize that, okay, I actually need to go away and do these things that are going to help the team, because I'll be on top of that preparation all week, and therefore I'll be in a better position to excel. So yeah, you're seeing that side of it off the pitch, which is really important. As Bernard mentioned, there's some great people working in this sphere, but that side of it is key as well.
Murray, looking at some of the individual performances then, we probably can't go through all 23 of them. They were all exceptional. I know it's a cliche, you could just pick a name out of a hat and they could be player of the match or whatever. It really was true, I think, over the course of that 80 minutes. But I don't know, where do you want to start? Like, how do you look at some of those individual performances, and how do you kind of apply that then to how we're shaping up for the future? I don't necessarily want to discuss World Cups in any great detail at the moment. Similar to Birch, let's just enjoy the moment, live for the day. But I guess with a glance to the future, like, how do you think things are looking?
Yeah, you do always have to have an eye forward, because fresh things are just around the corner. The Six Nations, I think, is going to be absolutely fascinating this year, because 5 of the nations will feel they're in a good spot. And Ireland are in a good spot in terms of they've found their best front row. We knew that this had massive potential. Clearly it does. Dan Sheehan's now in that mix as well, a really explosive player. And I think it'll be interesting to see how those backup slots pan out. It's great to have Cian Healy's experience at loose head. Finlay Bealham, I thought, has done well coming off the bench as well, but he will have competition for that slot. The second row is an interesting one because we're not quite 100% sure who his preferred pairing is now at the moment. James Ryan is obviously being groomed as the next captain, and that's been really interesting. I thought his performance last weekend was just excellent in terms of all the abrasive tone-setting moments that he provided. So that's a real luxury there in terms of Byrne, Henderson, Baird as well is another guy of massive potential. The back row, I think you've seen Conan and Doris really step into that gap that Standard left in terms of grabbing a hold and dominating games. Like Conan, it's funny, like 3 big test matches ago, he wasn't a first choice player for Ireland. So he's still, I suppose, settling into that role, and there's development to go there. Doris has been a phenomenon in the last fortnight and is starting to fill that potential that I think everyone who saw him even play when he was in Blackrock, even before that, back in Mayo, saw that potential from really early on in Ballina, and he's just really strode forward. He was very unlucky with the head injuries. I think he would have been a line otherwise, but we're seeing exactly how big a player he is now. So the two of them look like they're going to nail down those slots, and Josh van der Fleer has kind of got under the radar because of their performances, but he has been so important, and it's fascinating to have different options there with O'Mahony's skill set. Dan Levy probably to still come back in the mix. So I think the pack is settling into a really impressive unit that will continue to get better. Jamison Gibson Park, I agree with Birch, has really grabbed a hold of that 9 jersey now and fits into how they're attacking so well as defending strongly and kicking really consistently as well now. Like the things again that aren't as glamorous but are really key to how teams play. So that's been fascinating. Johnny Sexton still number 1, but it kind of works out well. I think Carberry probably would have got the start this weekend anyway, but without the injury. But that's a really good opportunity for him to kick on again. He spoke about it this week, the confidence lift he gets from coming off the bench and really contributing to that win, and now he gets a chance to steer the ship. So all those kind of key positions are looking really well, and I've been fascinated watching the back 3. I don't think everyone would have predicted Conway and Lowe being the first choice wings, but now there's not really doubt about it. Keenan obviously is one of the first names onto the team sheet, but Conway and Lowe have done superbly. I still think there's scope to look at others though, and Balakoon is a guy I think has major test potential as we've discussed before. So yeah, there's options there for Farrell now, and there's competition for places, and we've just spoken about all the other factors, but I think it's worth giving the players some credit for how things have gone. Like we came into this window wondering, are these guys match sharp? Are they hardened enough for big test matches? But they've all got themselves into good places and mentally in the right space as well. So that's a credit to them, while all of them have reminded us, let's not get carried away. I know you said you don't want to talk about World Cups. They want to focus on that, and they recognise that they've won 2 November tests and they don't have a trophy for that. They haven't fulfilled ambitions they have, and that has been one of the really impressive messages, I think, straight away afterwards. I thought in the press conference afterwards they might be a little bit more jubilant, a little bit more, we told you so, you idiots didn't listen to us, and this is what we can do. It wasn't like that at all, and I was actually impressed by the measured tone of everything they said. So hopefully that's a sign that this isn't going to be a peak and things will kick on.
It is an important point, Birch, because we idiots, when Ireland have been underperforming in the last 18 months, 2 years more, say even isolating the Farrell era, we'd be the first to point towards what we would perceive to be poor coaching or coaches getting things wrong. But I think usually we'd then qualify that by saying, but actually the players have to take a bit of responsibility here. You can't coach a guy to catch a simple pass, or at least you shouldn't be coaching a guy to catch a simple pass at this stage of his career, and passes are being fired out into touch, whatever. So there's a sense of individual responsibility to it as well. And just to highlight that, or to focus on that sense of responsibility was more than met. I mean, actually, individually, these guys are performing out of their skins now. So it's only fair to actually pay them their dues for, in some cases, maybe playing even above themselves, or at least playing to par.
Yeah, it's no, I think that's the beauty. That's what coaches need to try and do, is to get them to play above themselves, and also, like, I would have these arguments with players, when I'm chatting to them socially or whatever about criticism. Like, the reality is we can only judge on what we see over the 80 minutes. And it's all well and good them telling us camp is great and it's coming, but like we don't see that. You know what I mean? So and players have often said, and coaches have often said, it's coming, and it never comes as well. So it's not, we have to be analytical in terms of what we see. So I don't think the criticism has been harsh, and I'm delighted to be proved wrong as well, where I was wrong, and I'm delighted to say that I think now we're in a really good place, and I hope I'm not wrong on that. In terms of performances from Irish players, I think Keenan's become, like, I totally agree with Murray, and Murray's covered the areas that I was going to cover, but I think if you look at two guys who, Gary's been around a long time, Gary Ringrose, but wow, he was absolutely exceptional. And then the other one who has been around now, is into double figures in terms of caps. He's the first guy on the team sheet at fullback without any question. But he looks so comfortable now at this level. And again, he's stepped up because his first caps were in empty stadiums, and he looked really assured. And now he's gone into full stadiums in world-class oppositions, and again being exceptional. So I think Hugo Keane and Gary Ringrose are coming out of these two games with a lot of credit. And I picked up something. Look, it's not rocket science, whatever, but just in terms of their front row. So the two areas I think were very, very dominant now and look really balanced is obviously front row and back row. And Dalton Papali'i made either 26, 27 tackles, depending on whose stats you believe. Like he was effective. He had a big game. Artie Sevilla is top end, and Blackadder has deserved his chance. And yet our back row completely outplayed the All Blacks back row. And I don't know if I've ever seen an Ireland All Black game where that's happened, to be honest. So that's phenomenal testament to Josh, Jack, and Caelan. And then, I mean, how we targeted our front row. So imagine having a scrummage against Porter and Furlong, and then you're in the defensive line, you're getting a breather, and next thing, whatever back has the ball just takes you on. And, we got 3 line breaks from James Lowe, half breaks from James Lowe running at Moody and Luala, from Keenan doing it, from Gary Ringrose doing it. And that's not, there was also another opportunity where Sexton just dropped it off to Ronan Kelleher when they were together. And, Kelleher gets that extra 2 yards through contact that we got a gain line in the next phase. So there was little subtleties there where they obviously went in and wanted to target them and both at set piece and around the field, and it worked. It worked. They were absolutely out on their feet. And Cody Taylor, he had 10 minutes in the bin, and yet with 2 minutes to go in the first half, his body language was horrendous. I mean, the All Blacks, they'd be big on that. But again, that's not by chance. Ireland brought them to a place where they weren't comfortable, and and it wasn't, it was the players on the field who did that through their effort, which is phenomenal.
Ringrose is a really interesting one, isn't he, Birch? Because like even earlier this year, the way they were trying to play, I can remember a number of instances where you thought maybe he's actually not comfortable in this. Like maybe he actually doesn't have the scope to be that decision maker, heads up rugby. And there's been instances of that before in his career, even the Leinster Saracens, that final, you remember that time he didn't pass. But like Nasser, again, he looks so comfortable making those decisions, and you think, like, I was wrong to even doubt him in that regard. Clearly the coaches could see that potential, and now he's grabbed a hold of it, and again, he deserves responsibility for doing that. As you say, he gets his head up, and it sounds simple, but when you're down on pitch level and there's bodies all over the place, it's actually quite hard to pick out and scan that well and pick out that space. But now he is scanning a lot more. Even if you watch the game back, his head is up and he's just registering things a lot more now. And that, again, takes time to work on those skills, but he's clearly pushed himself in that regard. Keenan's another good example, a guy who looked, when he first came in, you think, he's just nuts and bolts player. But now he's got his head up all the time. He's stepping up at first receiver. He's offloading. He's passing really well and adding strings to his bow. So I think that development from the players is really encouraging. And again, like one of the best things that Andy Farrell said afterwards is like, Northern Hemisphere teams and ourselves have always rolled up our sleeves and got stuck in, and that's been the identity. But there's more to it. And obviously everyone's drawn the parallels with Stephen Kenny, but it is class to hear an Ireland coach saying that, because I think we've all had those doubts in the past and the way Ireland played, and the players are a bit limited, but clearly they enjoy being told you can do more, and now we're seeing them actually combine those work rate things that are massive, and the physicality of those forwards is key, but all of them are comfortable on the ball too.
We've got the Pumas arriving this weekend, and it's important to learn the lessons from the past. Obviously, not get carried away with the victory over New Zealand. So, Ireland, Argentina, Birch, obviously we're going to batter them. How are we going to do it?
Best team in the world now.
No, I think this is a tricky game. It's tricky to get back to the level emotionally, and the crowd won't be at the same level of ferocity. There'll be fatigue, physical and mental fatigue. So this is a real test, and I think it's a really fine balance for Farrell to get enough cohesion on the field to be able to win. Because I think it's important to win now and not have a poor performance or a poor result dampen what has been a really positive November. So we have to keep playing. And we got to get away from the dogfight that Argentina tend to do. And look, they actually try and play as well, but defensively they're very gritty. I would actually say they're probably harder to break down than the All Blacks. But some of their attack their attack's definitely not as good as the All Blacks, but they can play. So it's a really tricky one. And I think this is going to be a big test for Joey. And I think it's important for Joey that, and if Farrell went a little bit more conservative than maybe I thought he should have, or was going to, before last week, I think now it's fair that it's only fair to the guys coming in that they get some stability around them in terms of, as I said, that cohesion, and then obviously maybe later in the game you can bring more people on. But I just think for Joey, I think it's brilliant he got that 20 minutes and kicked those 3 goals. But I'd love to see him behind those forward pods, who are having the same level of accuracy in terms of staying square, having tip on or tip in options, and being able to give that pass to him at the right time, because I think that's what he's going to thrive off. So I'd hate to see him get a chance when the game is really unstructured. And I know people think that we're playing unstructured rugby, but we're not really. We're playing structured rugby off 3rd, 4th, 5th phase, which is giving us opportunities to to look really good and play on the front foot. So yeah, for me it's probably just a combination of getting enough stability in and bodies who are fresh to be able to go out and copy and paste and put in a similar kind of performance, particularly ball in hand.
Obviously, there will be a change at halfback on both sides, Bernard, and it's pretty obvious, I'd imagine, who's going to start. But look, that is, I guess, the creative nucleus of the team, or the epicenter of creativity, really. So, like, as much as we want to see a copy and paste job, it is going to be difficult, particularly when Carberry, who is going to be starting at out half, hasn't been pulling up any trees for Munster. So, how do you anticipate that actually going for Ireland?
I think it'll be Conor. I think it'll be Conor and Joey, and I think Conor deserves a chance to show what he can do. He hasn't played a huge amount of minutes for Munster, so it's hard to say is he in form or not, really. And Munster haven't been producing quality ball. So anyone who plays for Munster at 9 is probably been harshly, or 10 has been harshly judged, I think. So I'd love to see Conor get a start, and see where he's at. And then obviously I'd like to have Casey on the bench to come on, and then at least Joey's getting a crack with 2 9s that he's familiar with, and I think that's fair. It's only fair to Conor. I mean, I'm not writing off Conor at all, but now that I'd just say it, the way's being shown about how we need our 9 to play, and even though Conor might be able to do it quite as well as Gibson Park, he has other strings to his bow, but he certainly needs to be able to get it in and get it away quickly, or else the whole thing will start to get narrower, and what we've seen over the last 2 weeks will become less evident.
It's actually a bit of a challenge for Murray, isn't it? In the sense that, like, he obviously plays the game a certain way. It's not that he can't play at a higher tempo or he can't get the ball away faster, but generally speaking, the way Munster play and the way Ireland traditionally have played when he's been at his best, it's been at a bit of a slower tempo. So if it was to go badly for him this weekend, and when you consider you have people like Nathan Doak at home, don't forget, and Craig Casey, who can move the ball fairly quickly from what we've seen, God, I don't know, not to suggest that he'll be frozen out, but certainly there would be doubts in the coach's minds that he is capable of doing it, or that he really fits what they're trying to do now, which, as we've seen, has been successful in very recent weeks.
Yeah, definitely a big game for him. He's in the last season of a central contract as well, and that's up for debate as well. And you want to show that you've still got that massive capability to be a really important player for Ireland when those negotiations are around, albeit that shouldn't be on your mind as you're playing. Listen, he's shown in the past that he can play at tempo, he can pass really accurately. I think his decision making around those first couple of defenders in terms of his passing and picking out guys running into holes has been probably a little bit underrated in the past. You look at assist stats, and I know scrum halves will have a lot of them where they pop to a forward and they blast over, but Conor Murray has had an influence in making good decisions around the ruck. I think of a really good example with Jacob Stockdale, wasn't it last year, where he throws an extra long pass out the front to the forward pod and they break down the left hand side. Could have been Wales match actually, so I'm probably confusing myself there, and he's sniped in the past. He's obviously not as quick off the ground as Gibson Park is. He's a taller player, he's not as quick in terms of actual pace either as well, but it is up to him to show that he can fit in and provide those skills, as well as the kicking, as well as the really strong defence, as well as the composure and those things that he brings. So yeah, you're right, there's pressure there now, and this is exactly the scenario you wanted. It's not that long ago really that we're talking about this guy is miles ahead in his position as well, and there's no real competition. Now there's competition for the spots in the squad. Like, Gibson Park goes down with a thigh injury, and I think there was a few guys vying for that slot, and you could debate till the cows come home who should be in there. But it's a good position to be in, and that's exactly what Farrell has been trying to create: competition where no one's really comfortable in their spots. So yeah, I actually think we'll see a strong enough team this weekend, and even with the pack, I actually think that would be the right call, because Andrew Porter's only started 2 games at Loosehead. Ronan Keller's only started 6 tests. You think of Doris, he's got 10 caps. Even Jack Conan, he's started fewer than 20 tests, and obviously that's a better number than other guys. But time in the saddle is really important, as well as respecting the opposition. And Argentina, I know, have had a bad year, but Pablo Matero was sensational last weekend. When he gets going, when Marcus Kramer gets going, when some of those forwards and their maul is powerful, they can be an effective team as well. They're obviously playing high quality competition in the Rugby Championship, so it is tougher. So I think Farrell will be really keen just to keep this momentum all the way through, have a clean sweep with another impressive performance that builds on what they've seen. But at the same time, as Bert says, there's scope there for guys to come in and take their opportunity. Casey to be involved, maybe Ryan Baird, Balakoon. You can do a little bit of that while maintaining your momentum.
Bert, while hoping that Ireland get the job done this weekend, looking a little bit further into the future, but not too far, say only towards next year's Six Nations, how do Farrell, Cat, O'Connell and co drive this on now to the point that we see consistent progression? Where do Ireland need to improve based on what you saw over the weekend? And I guess moving in line with the way the sport is going, how do they become a more complete team for the spring, when you'd presume England are going to be back to near their best, and obviously France are going to be formidable? The Welsh never go away. You know the story.
Yeah, look, I think it's very obvious now what shape we're playing, and that will present challenges. And for example, the All Blacks didn't try anything different at us from their set piece D. We knew it played out exactly as we scouted it was going to play out. So we were able to get to the edge once we ran decent decoy lines. And I would say if you play the All Blacks, we played the All Blacks in June, they would throw different things at us, for sure. And that was the advantage we had. Even though you could say, you could see against Japan what we did, it would have been hard for the All Blacks to really believe Ireland were going to do what they did, and it was going to work against them because they were more physical, more line speed, etc. So I think that's going to be the next step is obviously being able to evolve and continue to pick the right option when the defence do things you don't expect them to do. And normally, to be honest, sometimes there'll be a step back. There'll actually be a breakdown, and we have to figure it out. So, but as you see things and encounter things for the first time, and you learn from those and you adapt, then you become a more complete team. So I think we probably had a little bit element of shock, and unpredictability. And obviously, I think from an attacking point of view, we are going to keep being predictable because that's how you build things. But what you need to be able to do is have little layers on and have little solutions to when the defence do things differently to you. So that's the next step. And it'll be Wales. It'll be Wales in the Six Nations. We'll start to see the start of that. We'll see a little bit of it tomorrow, but obviously, with Johnny out and a couple of changes. I think it'll realistically be Wales, and then into obviously England, France, etc. So that's the next step. I've no doubt we'll fix that A zone efficiency. I think that'll come back quite quickly. Defensively, conceded 2 tries against the All Blacks. The first one was very soft. If you lost the game based on that first try, you would be absolutely livid. It was just a little bit of over-eagerness from Ronan, gets in front of Tyke Furlong, and the All Blacks, once they get in behind you from a set piece, you're dead. The second one was obviously, I think James Lowe made a bad read. He got caught in no man's land, and once they get behind you, they kill you. But so will France, and so will England if they get back to their best. So there's a couple of areas defensively that we have to tighten up on, despite being very good defensively. But don't forget, we dominated territory possession against Japan. So our defence wasn't tested as much as it will be if our set piece is poor, or we don't win back to contestables, etc., etc. So there's still lots to be tested.
Dominated territory possession and won by 9 points in the end with a last minute kick. So yeah, we won't get carried away, Murray. But let's talk about Rassie. I don't know how much we want to talk about it. It's obviously huge news, right? And the thing is, we've covered it on the show previously, at least as far as the video that, well, we can say now he did release, really. At least that's what he's been charged with, or one of the things he's been charged with. The sanction thing is, it's odd, because it's kind of an apples and oranges situation, right? If a player gouges somebody in the eye and you hear they get banned for 6 months or whatever, you're like, yeah, that's actually commensurate to the crime. But on this occasion, it's not like inflicting any physical harm on anybody. It's sort of bringing the game into disrepute. It's a little bit different. He will be suspended from all rugby activity for 2 months, as we know, and then he's going to be suspended from match day activity until September of next year, which we might get into in a moment in terms of how much of a practical loss it'll be for South Africa. Obviously, he has the right to appeal this as well, by the way, and I presume that South Africa Rugby, and he will. I mean, I think they've stated their intention to do so. So where do you begin with this, Murray? I mean, I don't really know what the question is, to be honest.
He has, unless the appeal is successful, he also has to apologise to Nick Berry.
That'll be what hurts him most.
Yeah, I read the 80-page document, and they, the independent panel say that a couple of times. He shows no indication of apologising or showing any remorse. And it'd be fascinating to have a chat with him now and say, was it worth it? I think he would say absolutely worth it. We won the Lions series. I changed the whole dynamic of the refereeing team. And I don't think it'll bother him all that much. Obviously, he's, as he said in the written report, it mentions that he said, if you ban me, I'll lose out on earnings. My players will be affected by it, but I think this weekend they'll be rallied by it. Yeah, they're going to appeal it, and maybe he'll get a little bit of that stadium ban reduced. But I think he'll feel it's worth it. I do think, from World Rugby's point of view, it was also worth it. As we said at the time, I don't think what he did and the way he went about it, in particular with what Nick Berry felt was a character assassination, was acceptable at all. And you read the document, and lots of it is kind of, again, it's funny, and you're thinking, oh, this is hilarious. He tried to set up a WhatsApp group with the referees at one stage and try and add Joe Schmidt in there. Some of the stuff he said, if it's insulting to say you had a bad refereeing performance, well then yes, I was being insulting. That kind of stuff, you're tempted to kind of laugh and smile at it. But then you read Nick Berry's testimony, you think this actually really badly affected someone on a human level. It was extremely personal. I personally thought it was abusive, and I didn't agree with a lot of the points he made. I think anyone could do that with any game and put their slant on it. So I think it was really valuable that World Rugby did this, albeit with a bit of a delay. Again, it's explained in the document. There's so much in there, but yeah, I think Rassie will feel he was right to do it. And it is interesting that later in the document they write about how this process is a little bit convoluted and how it needs to be formalized, how this actually works. And it is striking when you're reading it. You can kind of understand the frustration from the Springboks not hearing back, even though they should be more used to how things work. As Bernard mentioned, that side of it can be extremely frustrating for coaches. And I'm not surprised in any way that this has happened. As we said at the time, this has kind of been coming, the frustration that coaches feel. So there's lots in it, but I'm glad he has been sanctioned quite heavily. But at the same time, I'd say he feels I was right, and I'm glad I did it.
Perhaps you were sympathetic towards his cause at the time, and a lot of coaches would have agreed with you and agreed with him, if not necessarily fully agreeing with his methodology and how he carried out.
He deserved to be punished. It's very harsh, I think, and I also think World Rugby, either have it before the November, have the decision early in the November tour, or have it next week, the 2 or 3 days before you play England. If you're a South African, and I know it doesn't take much to get them going, but they certainly feel they feel with obviously no coach in the nomination for World Coach of the Year, no player nominated. Given what they've done, there's a lot of reasons for them to feel a little bit of prejudice against them. But the reality is, Rassie, once he did that, was always going to face severe punishment, and he certainly has. And for sure, World Rugby want this to be a lesson to everybody, and we do need to protect the referees. I do think the World Rugby need to get their act together as well, and make sure that there's a better process for someone like Rassie to or any coach to basically get some answers. So I don't think they're without blame either, but I think it's very harsh, but probably justified. And as you said, Rassie did what he had to do. He's won a Lion series, and definitely played a role in that for sure.
It actually says in the document, if he didn't apologize, so there's no mitigation there. So he should have just apologized and said, I was making my point. The way he kind of threatened the referee, and it was very clear that was the case. I'm going to send this video viral, basically telling him that, and saying we're going to go down that route. It was very direct, and that stuff doesn't make for great reading. So there's loads in it. But as you say, Gav, they're appealing, and this is just going to rumble on, and it's been such a saga, and it definitely in the end I think took away from a lot of people's enjoyment of what is now going to be remembered as just a horrible line series, really.
Could I just say, Murray, on it, the idea that an apology would be in any way beneficial to anybody is nonsense to me. I find that almost offensive reasoning. No, and look, I understand. Look, it's human nature. You do something wrong, you apologize, or you own up to it, or whatever. But from Nick Berry's point of view, we highlighted this at the time. I suppose from Rassie's perspective, he's thinking, well, my performance as a coach is constantly scrutinised in the public. These referees are protected. So why not flip the script a little bit, and I'll give this masterclass on how Nick Berry was so wrong. For starters, referees aren't the ones criticising coaches, right? I mean, if he wanted to air grievances that way, he should have come after the likes of ourselves. But also, to do it for an hour and specify it or base it around one individual person, that wouldn't even happen to you on the flip side as a coach. We wouldn't sit here and talk about Andy Farrell for literally an hour and talk about everything he got wrong for an hour. He might say we would, but we genuinely wouldn't. It to be honest, it wouldn't make for good listening anyway. So it just was way too intensely personalised from my point of view. And how could it not affect then Nick Berry going forward? Genuinely, to have your performance scrutinised so publicly to the point that it's actually worldwide sporting news and you're at the centre of it based on 80 minutes. And I saw him, listen, I don't want to prescribe anything to his performance in the Wales-Fiji game. It wasn't his finest hour, but I couldn't help but wonder, God, has he had his confidence as an official shattered by that whole experience? And it wouldn't surprise me if he did. If I was in his shoes, I probably would have, so an apology, piss off with that, to be honest. I think the sanction is fair enough, and he did what he had to do. Listen, as you said at the top there, Murray, as we begun discussing it, Rassie would be happy enough, but I think the sanctions are fair, I suppose.
So the other bit is someone tried to broadcast it. I put up a joking tweet saying I would watch it, but someone obviously got onto them and said, can we broadcast this thing live? South Africa Rugby Union and Rassie Erasmus wanted it public hearing, but that wasn't the case. It would have made for, maybe it actually would have been really boring to watch.
80 pages. 80 pages.
Yeah.
True that. Before we go, guys, obviously looking ahead to the Ireland women's game against Japan, kind of the prologue, I guess, Murray, to a new era. They were in action a couple of weekends ago against the USA, got the job done. You guys, I've seen plenty of analysis of that, including in your trademark GIF form, particularly that Bevan Parsons try, which is unbelievable. I guess we have to start by mentioning Ciara Griffin walking away, and just, I guess, to take it at face value, she says she's had enough, and she's had an unbelievable career. She's put in an unbelievable amount of effort and work into her career, both for Munster and for Ireland. So to begin with, I guess, how would you summarise her impact on the women's game in this country?
That's for me, yeah.
Sorry, Maria.
Yeah, it's an awful shame. She's only 27, and this will be her 41st cap on Saturday. And you think, God, there was loads more left in Ciara Griffin, because she's been a remarkably consistent performer. Obviously, around the breakdown, extremely combative, leading by example with work rate consistently throughout her career, and became captain at the age of 24. It says a lot about her and the respect that others had for her as well. Even last weekend, like the pride she led the team with was really apparent, and it was a tough week, and I thought she handled that quite well. And then you listen to her the other night after the announcement, and she's talking about going away and working towards a few more qualifications in agriculture, spending time with her husband. I think they only recently got married, and seeing more of her family and not saying no to every occasion. And that was the bit where she got emotional when, she was asked, what do you sacrifice to be a amateur player? And she said, yeah, it's the family, it's not being there for events, and all rugby players, even all amateur rugby players, will know the reality of that. So you got to respect that, but at the same time, it's a pity it's not a more attractive I suppose landscape for her to maintain being a part of that Ireland team and be part of the rebuild at the age of 27. That's a shame. Clearly she's had enough of that. So yeah, it's the end of an era for them, a disappointing era, absolutely, with the 2017 World Cup and now the failure to get into the World Cup. There's, you hear about Lindsay Peat hanging up her boots as well, and that's not announced, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But it is going to be a process of finding players who can be consistently good performers like Ciara Griffin. She was the one of those like kind of people that never wavered and never underperformed for Ireland. So definitely will be badly missed as they go about this rebuild.
Bert, you'll have been in dressing rooms as well where there is a vacuum left by a natural born leader and a kind of a dominant personality departing. So I guess if she was going to do it, or if you are going to lose a captain, maybe now is a good time at the start of this new journey, not to put too fine a point on it, but how does a dressing room actually cope with that? Like, is it a kind of an organic process where more people fill in and maybe find themselves a little bit in that role, or does it have to be almost prescriptive, like coaches sitting down discussing it? How does that whole process play out?
Yeah, I think it'll obviously, with a new coach coming in, depend on how Greg sees developing leaders, or is there an automatic candidate who just has the credibility and the belief of the group, or is it going to be a shared kind of leadership model with 4 or 5 different players who are kind of that middle branch between the players and the coaches, and there's a lot of feedback and a lot of chat about what they're going to do. So yeah, I don't know, but I just think for Ciara's point of view, it's difficult to be a captain, but to be a captain of a team who are struggling for form or maybe getting negative results, that's draining. And I think I suppose I would maybe feel some sympathy for her that she maybe hasn't got the rewards in an Irish jersey that her efforts and her commitment deserve, but she'll still look back, very proudly on what she has achieved and how she's portrayed herself and how she's looked after her teammates, which is, I suppose, all you can have in an amateur sport. But she's someone who's widely admired across the men's and women's game.
I think I said they played at USA a couple of weekends ago, a moment ago. My sense of time is absolutely shagged by that holiday, I have to say. But certainly this weekend, they're back in action again. So what are you looking for against Japan, Murray? I mean, you've got Griffin signing off, you've got Adam Griggs signing off. It does feel like, as much as we've been describing these two games as maybe the start of something or the little precursor to something, this is kind of the end of an era now as well. And as you say, for Lindsay Peat, although we reckon what USA was possibly her last outing, was it? So, what are you looking for from just this 80 minutes?
Hopefully more the younger players shining. Obviously, you mentioned Parsons there, continues to score amazing solo tries. I thought Maeve O'Leary had a really good debut off the bench. First act was to kind of hold up a maul break, and the USA nearly scored and had another turnover later in the game, and that's great to see other players come through. We don't have a team named as we speak, but I really do hope it's a little bit more forward looking while respecting those people obviously who deserve to say farewell to supporters. Also hope to see a bit of a bigger crowd, and the crowd that were there were phenomenal. The volume they made was incredible, but I just thought after the week that was and everyone voicing their opinion on women's rugby, it was hoped that you might see a few more than, what do they have, 2,500, 2,600 maybe in the end. I thought they might get a couple more in the door. So hopefully the people who have such passionate views on women's rugby will also go and support it as well a bit. So yeah, it'll be obviously a win is the perfect way for someone like Ciara Griffin to sign off, and that's all she's worried about now. But a little bit of I suppose fodder there for someone like Greg McWilliams to go. That's really exciting. That player is going to fit into this spot, and a bit of that forward look as well.
Just before we go, Birch, I suppose from Greg McWilliams' point of view, what would he be looking for performance-wise this weekend?
Yeah, I think it was going to be very hard for him to get a real performance last week, given how difficult the week had been. So I think they deserve massive credit for grinding it out. But yeah, you would like to see a lot more accuracy in terms of their passing game and their handling, really. And hopefully that win settles them. And yeah, I think he's just looking to see what her skill set is like, because he will want to play a kind of a much more expansive game than before. I've seen what he's done with New York and Harvard and Michaels. He likes to play, so that's the big thing for him, is where the skill set is now, understanding that, and obviously trying to build it. So I'd say that's the main thing for him, rather than the result. Obviously we'll hopefully win. We should win, but it's really to get a bit more of a look at what he can build on it when he takes over on, I think, the 1st of December.
Magic. Bernard, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Murray, thank you as always.
Good to have you back, Av.
Nice one. Great to be back. Good to see. And thank you to everybody at home as well for listening. Thanks to the 42 members for your questions. It's members.the42.ie if you want to sign up there and listen to Murray's Extra Rugby podcast, Rugby Weekly Extra, with Owen Toolin, and these days with guests. They're pretty special, so do get on them. And also the Gary Keegan interview we mentioned earlier is with Shane Keegan on how to win at Domino's. There's a full series of that, actually 2 series of that, in which Shane sits down and speaks to some of the top coaches and sporting minds in Irish sport. Members.the42.ie. And Behind the Lines number 5, our new book, is on shelves and available at the 42 shop, or in the 42 shop at www.the42.shop. That's about it. We will be back over the weekend. Mind yourselves. Take it easy.